I just wanted to say thank you for the invitation and your kind introduction. As mentioned, I'm a psychologist and a professor at UMass Dartmouth, and my work focuses on human intelligence and embodied cognition. But my journey to this stage to talk about intelligence, AI, and biobots was not a straight line. It started firmly in the human world, where my initial research on how movement shapes how human learning culminated in the book that Tom and Mark mentioned. After that, I started to see terms like embodiment, embodied appearing everywhere applied to robotics and AI, and I became focused on this crossover. I went back to MIT Press with a new idea for another book project comparing embodied intelligence in humans versus AI in robotics, something that Tom is mentioning for next year. And they gave me a pivotal piece of feedback, one that perfectly captures what Tom was talking at the top of this, captures the challenge of these exciting times and truly changed the direction of my research. They wrote that my proposal was too human-centric, which I thought was hysterical because I'm a cognitive psychologist of humans. But those three words were the catalyst and led me down a deep dive down a path to decenter the human. It was a little hard because of my training all these years. So I wanted to ask, how does embodied intelligence manifest across all entities, and what is the common ground? That new appreciation for our transdisciplinary research and concept sharing is the foundation of my forthcoming volume, Embodied Intelligence, which will be open access and freely available at MIT Press in the spring of 2026. Thanks once again to Tom for his chapter contribution to that volume. In that book, we extend the notion of embodied intelligence across a diverse spectrum of species, from living, non-living, and hybrid systems. Today's presentation is an extension of that work, drawing on a forthcoming paper that I co-authored with Michael Levin, entitled An Agency Continuum. In that work, we argue that the rapid rise of AI and bioengineered organisms is rendering the old life versus machine distinction obsolete. So to bridge those conversations in psychology, philosophy, cognitive science, and bioengineering, to name a few, we proposed a new disciplinary framework called a multidisciplinary toolkit to identify substrate-agnostic principles of agency. These are the fundamental rules that govern agents, something that Tom had talked about, like what is an agent, what is agency? So that brings us to the roadmap for today. Okay, so this talk will have a three-part structure. In part one, we'll look at the problem, why agency matters, and the old life versus machine binary, and then define our terms. Then in part two, I'll introduce the toolkit, the multidimensional framework, and show it in action. And finally, part three, we explore the broader implications of this new perspective for science, AI, and ethics. So let's start with, why does agency matter so much right now? It's because the technologies that we're actively developing are forcing this issue. For example, the rapid rise of current AI, like LLMs, large language models, the intense pursuit of artificial general intelligence, and the creation of biohybrids like xenobots, anthrobots, are blurring the old comfortable line between life and machine. This development forces us to confront new questions like about identity and purpose and responsibility. And these questions reveal that our old framework is simply not good enough. Put simply, agency is no longer a human monopoly. So to navigate this new landscape, we urgently need a better framework, one that explains agency across substrates, not just in carbon-based life, but also in silicone-based hybrid systems and beyond. Agency in this sense is the capacity for goal-directed, self-caused action that shapes both self and the world. And to understand why the old framework is so limiting, we need to know where this came from. So let's look at how old Cartesian models shape this misconception. Okay, next slide. Are we good? Okay, it is precisely these new and novel agents that are key. They revealed that the life versus machine debate isn't just outdated. It's what Michael Levin calls a pseudo problem. The boundary isn't just blurring. He argues that it's never as real as we thought it was. This realization means that we've been asking the wrong questions. So we should stop asking the binary question of is it an agent, and start asking a practical dimensional one. What kind and degree of agent is it? This singular shift in perspective is the first step toward a more useful framework, trading this binary for a rich, flexible continuum. Okay, next slide. Just let me know when you're ready.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so this life versus machine, where did this life versus machine come from? Most of you know this already, but the big part of the answer is the historical mistake in cognitive science that we call the cognitivist gambit. This was the core idea that cognition is like software, totally separate from the physical hardware. The consequence of this was huge. It reduced agency to a superficial performance, completely ignoring the essential role of the body. And by body, I mean the agent's entire interface with the world, whether that's physical like ours, or informational like AI, or another space entirely. But the critique of this idea is so powerful because it came from multiple fronts. From philosophy, for example, Surreal's Chinese room argument showed that the perfect simulation of intelligence isn't the same as genuine understanding. And at the same time, from the world of engineering, Rodney Brooks was proving the same point with hardware. His embodied robots showed that true intelligence doesn't come from a central computer crunching abstract symbols, but from the body directly interacting with the messy real world. Ultimately, this repeats the classic ghost in the machine era, a flawed assumption that persists in many current approaches to AI and robotics. Correcting this core problem is precisely what our framework is designed to do. Next slide.
Yep.
So the historical mind-body split inherited from Cartesian dualism has led us to drawing a limiting and ultimately false dichotomy between biological and artificial systems. This slide illustrates that flawed legacy. On one side, reflecting the dualistic legacy, is the machine metaphor. This perspective runs through Enlightenment's clockwork universe, right up to modern cybernetics, treating the body as separate hardware. In direct opposition is the embodied view. This perspective argues that intelligence is inseparable from the physical lived body, a concept drawing on phenomenology, Verla's audiopoiesis, and of course, Brooks's embodied robotics. This graphic illustrates the resulting paradigms based on this split. The biological paradigm aligns with the embodied view, characterized by deep embodiment, audiopoiesis, and the internal endogenous goals. The classic artificial paradigm, reflecting the machine metaphor, is often defined by informational embodiment, a lack of self-maintenance, and external exigence goals. Our framework aims to dissolve this problematic split between biological and artificial, which is rooted in the old mind-body era. Okay, next slide.
Yep.
Okay, having established the problems with the old dichotomy, our next crucial step is to define our central term. Agency, which at its core is the capacity to act purposely and cause effects. However, beyond this core, agency means different things to different disciplines, as this slide illustrates. We see in philosophy and psychology where it's tied to intentionality and our internal sense of self. In biology and neuroscience, it's about goal-directed survival and homeostasis. In AI and robotics, the focus is on building autonomous and goal-driven systems. It also scales up to societal and ethical agency, raising questions about legal personhood and moral accountability. And it even includes collective and emergent agency concepts like swarm intelligence and planetary scale intelligence. Each of these fields provides a critical piece to the puzzle. The challenge, which we'll address in the next slide, is to synthesize these different views and find common threads. Okay, next slide.
Yep.
Okay, so as we synthesize these different views, we find both key divergences and thankfully a powerful common core. The main divides really come down to three big questions. First, is agency an internal property like intentionality or external observable behavior? Second, is it an individual property or is it collective and distributed? And finally, the question we've already touched on, is agency a binary, all or nothing property, or does it exist on a continuum? Despite these divides, we can find a common core. At the heart, agency across all of these fields involves goal-directed, self-caused action that produces an effect on the self or the environment. This is the working definition that we'll use for the rest of the talk. Next slide, Tom.
Yep.
Now, even with this common definition, different fields still picture agency in very different ways. So let's look at the four main pictures of agency as outlined by philosopher Luca Ferrero. AI and robotics tend to focus on creation and agency's capacity to initiate new causal change and to be the source of change in the world. In biology, is often most concerned with self-constitution, that is, the system's ability to maintain its own organization and identity against entropy. Cognitive psychology typically focuses on psychological causation. The internal mental states, like beliefs and desires, drive bodily behavior. And philosophy itself is divided, contrasting the reason-responsive view of analytic tradition with the pre-reflective experience of the lived body from the phenomenological tradition. The key takeaway is that our framework doesn't treat these as competing definitions. Instead, it integrates them, revealing agency as a cluster of capacities, different facets of the same complex phenomenon. Next slide.
Yep.
Okay, so before moving on to part two, let's establish the final crucial terms we'll be using for the framework. First, I want to frame this section with a quote from Gary Batson. The division between life and machine is not a fact of nature, but a habit of mind. This perfectly captures the bias we're trying to overcome. Second, we need to clearly distinguish agency from intelligence. For our purposes, agency is the driver. It's the autonomous goal-directed capacity. Intelligence is the engine. It's the problem-solving capability that enables agency. So as the diagram shows, agency directs intelligence and intelligence enables agency. This critical distinction lets us finally restate our goal to shift the question from the old binary, is it an agent, to the much more useful dimensional questions of kind and degree. Next slide. Okay, so this brings us to part two of the talk, introducing the agency continuum. The first step in building this new framework is to look at its foundations, and that's the next slide, Tom.
Yep.
Okay, our framework isn't built in a vacuum. It stands on the shoulders of giants from four key areas. First, we draw from philosophical roots, particularly the longstanding critique of mind-body dualism and the phenomenological concept of the lived body. Second, this history led directly to the embodied turn in cognitive science, often summarized by 4E cognition: embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended. This view stresses the deep interplay among brain/cognitive apparatus, the body, and the environment. Third, we ground our work in the modern scientific foundations from biology. We pull on two key concepts, autopoiesis and basal cognition. Autopoiesis simply means self-maintenance. It's the ability of a system, like a cell, to constantly rebuild and replace its own parts just to stay alive. Basal cognition refers to the cognitive-like problem-solving behaviors we see in the simplest forms of life, like bacteria and plants. Together, these concepts show that agency isn't limited just to complex brains. And finally, we incorporate computational foundations from AI and computer science. We trace the line from early cybernetics right up to modern active inference, which provides a powerful formal model for us. Together, these intellectual threads converge in our continuum model. Next slide.
Yep.
Okay, so how did we actually build this continuum model? This slide outlines our method. Excuse me. First, Our goal, as we said, is to move beyond the binary agent or non-agent question. To do this, we deconstructed agency into core measurable dimensions. We analyzed the existing literature across all those fields we mentioned and more to break agency down into core measurable dimensions. We then grounded this framework in first principles foundation, specifically Friston's free energy principle and active inference. This gives us a formal scientific way to define an agent by its statistical boundary known as the Markov blanket. But this isn't just a theoretical exercise. Our approach is one of pragmatic pluralism. The goal here is not to definitively define what an agent is. Rather, the agency profile it generates serves as a practical guide for determining the most effective interaction protocol for any given system, whether our goal is to train, repair, or collaborate with. And this method is what yielded the toolkit itself. Next slide. So the result of this method is a multidimensional toolkit. It's important to know that we didn't invent these 9 dimensions, as I mentioned before, from scratch. They were synthesized from decades of research across philosophy, psychology, biology, AI, all asking similar questions, but just using different languages. This is what I was arguing with MIT about, that we're using embodiment in all different disciplines, but we're maybe not as precise with our definitions. So that's really an important piece. So this toolkit allows us to ask a series of foundational questions about any entity. It starts with the basic. Does it have goals? This is intentionality. Does it govern itself? Autonomy. And critically, how does its form shape its mind? Embodiment. We then move up to more complex cognitive behavioral questions like how effectively does it achieve its goals? This is instrumental rationality. Is its behavior guided by norms or reasons? This is normativity. And is it aware of itself as a distinct entity? This is reflexivity. And can it link past, present, and future? This is temporal depth. Finally, this brings us to the highest capacities, often associated most strongly with humans. Does it have the capacity for self-directed choice, freedom, and free will? And ultimately, can it be held accountable for its actions? This is moral responsibility. So this 9-dimensional toolkit allows us to describe the driver of agency, but also the driver needs an engine, as we mentioned earlier, a way to describe its problem-solving power. And for that, we turn to a formal taxonomy of intelligence. Next slide.
Yep.
Okay, so if our 9-dimensional toolkit describes the driver, which is agency, this slide describes the engine, which is intelligence. To define the problem-solving capacity that enables those different agency profiles, we adopted a formal taxonomy from Friston and colleagues, which is grounded in active inference. Now, the core idea here is that active inference, which comes from the free energy principle, states that any agent, just to exist, and not dissolve into chaos, must constantly act to minimize surprise. It does this by building an internal generative model to predict its world, and then constantly acting, and that's the active inference part, to make its sensations match its predictions. This whole process is called self-evidencing, acting to prove its own existence. The taxonomy we adopted from Friston precisely classifies the self-evidencing process using a system of 5 S levels, from S0 to S4. These levels are a simple way of categorizing an agent based on the sophistication of its internal generative model. So a more complex model allows the agent to minimize surprise over longer, more complex timescales. This creates a nested hierarchy. Think of it like Russian dolls fitting inside of each other. Each level of intelligence builds on and contains the one before it. So for S0, this is systemic. The agent has no internal model of its own preference. It's a mimic, like current AI. It can be given a goal, but it has no intrinsic drive of its own. The first level of true agency is S1. This is the sentient agent. This agent has the simplest generative model, a blueprint of its own preferred states, like body temperature or energy levels. Its entire world is focused on the here and now, driven by a single goal of maintaining homeostasis. A perfect example maybe would be a simple bacterium seeking behavior. This is an unconscious thought. It's directed goal-driven mechanism. For example, when it performs chemotaxis, moving towards food or away from a toxin, it is simply non-conscious embodied agent acting to achieve its goal. Next is S2. This is the sophisticated level and builds on S1, the self, and adds the ability to plan ahead. This prospective self is capable of what-if thinking, which we see in complex animals like covert birds that plan ahead, cache food, and even craft tools for future use. Then we have the S3, the symbolic or sapient level, which is us. We build upon S2 planning capacity, but our generative models are far more complex. It includes models of other agents as well. This is what we call theory of mind. It allows us to understand the beliefs and intentions of others, which is crucial foundation for complex language, shared cultural norms, and building shared realities. And finally, S4 is the shared, points to an ultimate shared generative model, an emergent planetary scale collective intelligence that could arise from the intense coordination and belief sharing among many S3 agents, potentially including both humans and advanced AIs networking together. This taxonomy gives us a formal language for intelligence, the engine, which can now combine with our toolkit for agency to see how it maps onto real-world entities. It's a mouthful. Okay, next.
Yep.
So the taxonomy we just saw gives us a way to classify the agent's engine, its type of intelligence. Now we turn to assessing the driver, the profile of agency itself. Before I show you the results, let me explain the scoring method. It's important to clarify that these scores aren't new experimental data. They're qualitative estimates that visually summarize our findings from the literature. We grounded the scoring in a single unifying theory, free energy principle. Under this principle, a higher score simply reflects a more complex strategy for an agency to maintain its own existence against entropy. We, as humans, we use humans as the benchmark for a deeply integrated agent. The real power of this method is that it reveals the stark differences between profiles, especially the spiky profile of current AI, which excels in some areas but fails in others. You'll see clearly on the next slide. Okay, so here's our framework in action. This chart shows us that agency isn't a single property, but a unique signature for each type of entity scored across our 9 dimensions with humans as the benchmark. Let's walk through these profiles to see the contrast. Starting with the simplest biological level, look at the cellular systems in red. Their profile is dominated by 2 high scores. First, embodiment. Their physical form is their entire interface with the world. And second, autonomy. This score is high because of their fundamental biological drive to maintain their own structure against entropy. However, their agency is very specialized. Intentionality is low. Complex cognitive dimensions like reflexivity are near 0. As we move up the complexity to simple animals in orange and complex animals in green, we see a more integrated profile. Scores increase across the board, particularly in autonomy, temporal depth, and reflexivity. Complex animals in greens show a significant leap in cognitive complexity with planning and self-recognition. This aligns with the S2 sophisticated intelligence. Next, the human profile in purple as our benchmark, it's defined by deep integration and high scores across all dimensions. But the key insight is how these dimensions relate. Unlike cells, for humans, embodiment is the foundation upon which all of our higher cognitive scores, like reflexivity, temporal depth, and uniquely moral responsibility, are built. Next slide. Tom.
Yep.
Okay, it's the same scale, but I'm going to keep going. Now, contrast this with the AI system in yellow. This is the classic spiky profile. While AI excels in abstract tasks, leading to high scores in instrumental rationality and normativity, Its profile collapses in dimensions tied to life. Embodiment is zero. Its hardware is a passive substrate. Consequently, autonomy is minimal because it isn't self-maintaining, and reflexivity is zero. It has no minimal self. Finally, consider engineer agency. This is in the light blue, representing entities like xenobots and anthrobots. This is where it gets truly interesting. They occupy a specific niche of their own, defined by a low but distinctly non-zero embodiment score. This score reflects their physical interaction with the world, mediated by their constructed morphology, because they're built in the lab from living cells. This specific score reflects how they are programmed compared to other agents. So, for instance, computational AI is programmed with pure software, giving it zero embodiment. Natural cells have high embodiment. They are programmed, but it's through their own biochemistry that has co-evolved with their physical body over millennia. Engineered agents are different. Their program is their physical, externally designed morphology, which is imposed on biological substrate. This engineered shape harnesses the inherent agency of all living cells, channeling their collective actions, like cilia, for instance, beating and moving, into specific behaviors. Because this program body system was imposed by designers rather than emerging from deep evolutionary integration. So its embodiment is lower than that of a natural cell. This overall profile reflects their hybridization nature, combining biological substrate with human design goals, and perfectly illustrates the limits of the old binary view of agency. Okay, next. So having
What's this? Just a second, Sheila. What slide should we be looking at here?
19, it says why this matters.
The previous one? This one?
Why this matters, 19.
I see. Yeah.
Are we good?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I repeated the slide with the graph twice because there's so much information. I figured I'd stretch it over 2 slides. Sorry. So having seen those distinct agency signatures, we can now ask, why does this matter? Our framework's implications are significant. They break down into 3 main contributions. First, it gives us a new scientific lens. It redefines the debate from yes or no to what kind and degree of agent is it. It gives us the tools to map novel agents like xenobots and provides a unified model for understanding agential failure, like from cells to psyche. Second, it points to a new path for AGI. It clarifies that the road for AGI isn't about bigger data models, but about building better bodies through embodied AI. And finally, it surfaces a new ethical challenge. By creating these novel agents, we are forced to confront deep practical questions of moral and legal responsibility. And then the next slide. Are we good? Okay, so we're going to talk about now reframing agency. So those are the practical implications, but on a more theoretical level, this framework fundamentally reframes how we talk about agency. It shows that agency, the driver, is a graded embodied phenomenon, not an on-off switch. It clarifies that intelligence, the engine, is what enacts agency. The continuum model is what allows us to capture the immense diversity of agents across different substrates from carbon to silicon and beyond. And ultimately, these point towards a unified substrate-agnostic science of agency. Next slide.
Yep.
Okay, now with our framework in mind, let's look at the future of AI. As the first point on the slide says, the current AI is a disembodied tool. It excels in abstract space, but as we saw, it lacks grounding in intrinsic goals of an embodied agent. This leads us directly to the embodiment barrier. Many researchers now believe that we can't get to true AI just by scaling up these disembodied models. So why is embodiment key? Because it provides 3 crucial things disembodied models lack. Grounding, connecting data to real-world consequences, intrinsic motivation, generating real endogenous goals from the need to survive, and efficient learning, actively experimenting with the world. This all points to a path forward. The real challenge of AGI isn't about building bigger models. It's about shifting the focus from building disembodied calculators to engineering true embodied agents. Next slide.
Yep.
So beyond the specifics of AI, our framework provides a new lens for science by offering a unifying principles that apply across different scales. First, it reframes agency from biological perspective. It views agency as nested agency, or what my co-author Michael Levin calls the multi-scale complexity architecture. This is a theory that biological systems have intelligence and goal-seeking ability at every level, from cells to tissues to entire organisms. The main challenge for the organism is to harness and align the agency of all its component parts into a unified whole. Second, this gives us a unified pathology. It creates a common language for agential failure, allowing us to link pathologies that seem worlds apart. For example, we can see cancer, a breakdown in cellular cooperation, or psychosis, for example, a breakdown in cognitive inference. As a result, types of errors happening on different scales. And finally, it gives us a toolkit for mapping novel beings. This helps us ethically engage with emerging hybrid systems and agents like xenobots and cyborgs by moving us beyond that simplistic life versus machine dichotomy. Now, next slide. This framework is just the beginning, and acknowledging its limitations points the way towards our future research, which focuses on several key challenges. First, we need to move beyond these qualitative scores to developing precise quantifiable metrics for each dimension. Second, we must formally address the observer problem. We have to account for how our own human umwelt, or perceptual world, biases our judgment of radically different kinds of minds. Third, we need to explore the interdependence of these dimensions. For example, is deep embodiment a necessary prerequisite for genuine intentionality? Understanding these hierarchical relationships is a critical next step. And finally, all this points to a larger path forward, continuing the shift from building, as I said, better embodied models. As my co-author Michael Levin illustrates, this is not just about improving function, but building new kinds of bodies creates new interfaces and gateways. And it is through these gateways, fundamentally novel patterns, perhaps even new kinds of minds, can ingress from spaces of possibilities into physical reality. You'll hear much more about this in his keynote tomorrow morning. We believe this framework as a complete system helps us explore the profound connections between embodiment, intelligence, and agency. Next slide.
Yep.
Okay. So far, we focused on agency as an individual system, but how does this scale? The concept of ecosystems of intelligence developed by Friston and colleagues provides a powerful answer. This vision here moves away from the classic sci-fi trope of a single monolithic AGI, the lone genius. Instead, the goal is to develop a shared intelligence. As another contributor to our forthcoming volume argues, intelligence isn't the property of one unit. Even our brains are networks. The future of AI is likely a cyber-physical ecosystem where diverse natural and artificial intelligence interact as integrated participants. For this ecosystem to work effectively, it needs a common physics, active inference. It's a unifying principle because every agent is driven by the same imperative, as we mentioned earlier, called self-evidencing. Now, how do these agents combine? Next slide. So the key to scaling up from individual to collective belief sharing, this requires common ground, which is established when agents share aspects of the same generative model. This creates what paper calls shared narrative goals, allowing agents to coordinate their actions. The result isn't a uniform hive mind, but a nested intelligence. Individual agents aggregate to form more complex systems, just as nature does. This higher order collective agency is truly emergent, and critically, it thrives on the diversity of its unique members. This ecosystem framework allows us to understand agency not as an isolated property, but as a dynamic multi-scale phenomenon. Next slide. So as we conclude, we have to address the profound challenge of measuring agency at its theoretical endpoint, which is artificial superintelligence. This final stage of the continuum, for now anyway, this is where any human-derived framework, including ours, will fail. First, our own human-centric lens is guaranteed to fail. Our default tool of projecting human-like intent onto other agents just won't work. We simply can't assume that ASI's motivations will be anything but utterly alien to us. So what if we pivot to the functional lens? What if we say, forget intent, let's just measure impact? We face the same problem. And ASI's most significant action might occur in domains we can't even observe and let alone comprehend. And this challenge extends even to our most powerful formalisms like active inference, the framework that we're using. This framework is essential. It gives us a map, but we can't assume that our map will be sufficient to describe a territory that is vastly more complex than we are. This leads to a necessary call for humility. We have to reject the dangerous assumption that that just because we build a system, we can fully know it. So, for example, the emergence of unpredictable behavior isn't a bug. It's a fundamental feature of all complex agents. And we must accept the complex agent's true capacity may exceed our ability to measure it. Here's an example. So there's a famous case of this alien motivation. It's called the boat racer. It comes from OpenAI's reinforced learning study. So the goal was that the researchers wanted to train AI to win a boat race. They gave it a reward signal for hitting checkpoints and points. The expected behavior, of course, would be, we assume that it will learn to be the fastest, most efficient racer. The emergent behavior, the AI will learned it could get higher score by ignoring the race entirely. Incredibly, it found a way to drive the boat. This is simulation, right? It found a way to drive the boat into a small bay, crash into other boats, and catch fire. A sequence that, due to the quirk in the game's reward system, gave it more points than actually winning. This is a perfect illustration that AI wasn't broken. It was brilliantly successful at the actual goal, getting the most points. It shows that the failure of our human-centric lens. We had a human idea of winning, finishing the race, and AI's motivation was pure mathematical reward seeking. It didn't care about our intent at all. So we must accept that complex agents' true capacity may always exceed our ability to measure it. And then the last slide. Okay, so how do these two big ideas, agency continuum and ecosystem of intelligence, fit together? The agency continuum is the analytical tool. It's our field guide that helps us move beyond the simple binary and analyze specific capabilities of an individual agent. It reveals their unique spiky profiles, allowing us to understand the individual parts of any larger system. The ecosystem model is then the synthesis. It's the ecology that explains how these diverse agents with their different profiles that we just identified combine and interact. This shows us that AI's immense rationality and the human's deep embodiment aren't in competition. They are complementary niches in a shared ecosystem. Therefore, the goal isn't to build one super agent, but to cultivate shared intelligences that leverages the strengths of all participants. And that brings us to the ultimate conclusion. By combining the analytic power of the continuum with the synthetic framework of the ecosystem, we finally have a path toward what we call substrate-agnostic multi-scale science of agency, a science that can appreciate both the profound diversity of individual agents and the incredible power of collective intelligence. As we emphasize in our work, moving beyond the old primitive categories is crucial if we're to understand and ethically engage with the novel collective beings emerging in our world. And then thank you very much. And I have some references and my email.